The Queen and her captains. The air in the Letter-1E63, a royal palace, wasn't just thick with the scent of jasmine and wealth, it was heavy with secrets waiting to be whispered. And for the past few months, every hushed conversation, every sideways glance in the corridors was about one person, Queen Adiola. Young, sharp-witted, and carrying a beauty that seemed blessed by the ancestors themselves, Adiola had worn the crown for 2 years. She had stepped into her father's sandals with a grace that silenced the doubters, ruling with a modern fire that the youth admired and a respect for tradition that kept the elders content. She was, by all accounts, the perfect queen, too perfect. And in the gilded cage of the palace, perfection was often just a mask waiting to slip. The slip had a name spoken in tantalized murmurs: Captain Kitten. He was not a prince, he was not a chief. Kitten was the son of a yam farmer from a village the palace mapmakers barely acknowledged. He was a boy from the dusty side of the capital who had clawed his way up through the royal guard with nothing but raw strength and a fierce, unblinking loyalty that burned in his dark, watchful eyes. He had risen to become the head of the Queen's personal guard, a living shadow that followed her everywhere. A very handsome, very well-built shadow. For the first year he was just that, part of the scenery. A strong jawline here, a pair of broad shoulders there, a uniform standing in a corner. But then the Queen began to see him. It happened during the harvest festival. A stray bull, spooked by the drums, had broken from its handler and charged toward the royal platform. Before the other guards could even draw their swords, Kitten had moved. He didn't kill the beast. Instead, with a dancer's grace and a wrestler's power, he intercepted it, using his own body to divert its path, calming it with a low voice until its owner could regain control. He stood up, dusting off his uniform, and gave the Queen a short, professional bow, a small cut bleeding on his cheek. In that moment, Adiola didn't see a guard. She saw a man who chose skill over violence, who protected without needing to destroy. That was the spark, the whispers were the kindling. It began, the kitchen staff would swear, with the fruit. Bola, the head cook whose word was law amongst the pots and pans, was the first to notice. Queen Adiola was notoriously picky, known to only eat the golden mangoes from the royal orchard. One morning, Bola watched as Captain Kitten quietly stopped a junior guard from taking the Queen's breakfast tray. With a look that could curdle milk, he carefully removed the mangoes and replaced them with a handful of plump purple agbalumo, the sweet and sour star apples that only grew in his home village. Bola's eyes widened. How did he even get them into the palace kitchen? An hour later, the tray returned empty. The Queen, who hadn't touched agbalumo since she was a child, had eaten every last one. The whispers started like a harmattan wind, gentle and dry at first, picking up dust. "Did you see the captain this morning?" a handmaiden would murmur while plaiting another's hair. He dismissed the Queen's usual morning escort, said he would walk her to the gardens himself, for security reasons. The other would giggle, her hands freezing on the braid. "The only thing he's securing is more time with her. Old man Gok, the gardener, told me he saw them, said they weren't talking about state affairs. He said the Queen was tracing the patterns on a hibiscus flower, and the captain was watching her like she was the only sun in the sky." The gossip got juicier. They said the Queen had dismissed her royal sparring partner, a grizzled old warrior who had trained her father. The reason given was his age, but everyone knew the truth. Now she trained only with Kitten, twice a week in the private courtyard shielded by high walls. The guards on duty would practically draw straws for the post, just to overhear something. "I swear on my mother's cooking pot," one told a rapt audience in the barracks, "I heard laughter. Not the Queen's polite little laugh for the council, but a real, deep-belly laugh. The kind that makes you gasp for air. Then I heard a thud, a pause, and then more laughter, but softer this time, closer. It was the sound of a woman comfortable, not a queen on display." "He's teaching her more than how to throw a punch, that's for sure," another snickered. The Queen was changing. The stiff, formal brocade gowns were often replaced with simpler, flowing silks in vibrant colours. A genuine, unguarded smile would flash across her face when she caught Kitten's eye during a tedious council meeting. Once, when an elderly chief droned on about tax collection, she'd met Kitten's gaze across the room, and he'd given a subtle, almost imperceptible roll of his eyes. She had to press her lips together to keep from smiling, a shared secret in a room full of oblivious men. She was a woman falling in love, and she was gloriously bad at hiding it. Kitten, for his part, remained a fortress. His face was a mask of professional duty, but his actions screamed devotion. He personally inspected every meal, every gift, every inch of her path with a ferocity that went beyond his station. He knew she hated the stuffiness of the throne room, so a fresh, wild orchid, the kind that grew near his village, started appearing in a small vase near her seat every morning. He knew she read late into the night, so he made sure the guard changing shift outside her chambers did so silently, without the usual clatter of spears. These were small, intimate rebellions against protocol, acts of love disguised as acts of service. The betrayal, when it was finally sprung, wasn't from a foreign enemy or a palace intruder. It came from within, from the Queen's own blood. Lord Adekunle, her cousin, was a man with a slippery smile and hands that were always rubbing together, as if washing themselves of a dirty deed. The throne, he believed, should have been his. He saw the Queen's affection for her guard not as a romance, but as a disgusting weakness, a scandal he could weaponize. He began his campaign of poison, choosing his audience carefully. He'd sit with the most conservative elders, his voice dripping with false concern. "It breaks my heart to see our great Queen so distracted," he'd sigh. "She dishonors the throne. Our ancestors weep to see the royal bloodline on the verge of being tainted by a commoner, a boy who smells of dirt and ambition. What will our allies think? They will see us as weak, led by a woman ruled by her passions, not her mind." Adekunle arranged his trap perfectly. Knowing the Queen and Kitten sometimes met in the old stables to talk away from prying eyes, he paid a servant to deliver a frantic, fake message to the Queen about her favorite horse being injured. Then, with practiced alarm, he gathered a group of the most influential chiefs. "I fear the Queen is in danger. I was told she ran to the stables alone." They found them, not in a lover's embrace, but in a moment far more intimate. A lantern cast a golden glow as Kitten gently wrapped a clean cloth around a cut on the Queen's hand, which she'd gotten on a thorny rosebush earlier. His touch was tender, his head bowed in concentration. She was looking at him not with the authority of a queen, but with an expression of pure, unadulterated affection. The look that passed between them was more damning than any kiss. It was a look of shared souls. Adeola was summoned before the Council of Chiefs. The air in the chamber was thick with judgment and stale with the scent of old wood and older traditions. Adekunle stood to the side, his face a mask of sorrow, the perfect picture of a loyal relative forced to do his painful duty. "Your Majesty," an old chief began, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "We have been told, we have seen that you have compromised the sacred dignity of this crown. You have been intimate with your guard." The room was deathly silent. Adeola stood tall, her chin high, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She looked at each of them, her gaze unwavering. "Intimate?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "You wish to speak of intimacy. Is it intimate to have someone in your life who sees the woman, not just the crown? Is it intimate to trust someone with your life, not just your laws? Captain Kitten has stood between me and an assassin's blade. He has offered me honest counsel when all of you offered me flattery. If that is intimacy, then I am guilty." She turned her gaze on Adekunle, and it was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "Or perhaps," she continued, her voice rising with a power that rattled the old rafters, "you mean the kind of intimacy my cousin Adekunle has with the mining contracts for the Northern Territories, the ones he signs in secret, selling off our kingdom's wealth for his own fat pockets." A collective gasp swept through the chamber. Adekunle's face went from pale to ashen. "This is a lie, a desperate lie. She is deflecting from her own shame," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Is it?" the Queen countered smoothly. At that exact moment the grand doors to the council chamber swung open. Captain Kitten walked in. He was not in his guard's uniform, but in the simple, proud clothes of his people. He was not there as her lover, but as her witness. He strode to the great table and placed a heavy, leather-bound ledger upon it. With a resounding thud, it echoed the fall of Adekunle's ambition. It was filled with copies of every secret deal, every bribe, every piece of land sold. It was the fruit of months of quiet, loyal investigation, conducted by a captain who had sworn to protect his queen from all threats, both outside and inside the palace walls. The whispers in the palace didn't stop. They never would. But now they had a new tune. They sang of the farmer's son who had not only captured the queen's heart but had also saved her kingdom. They spoke of a wise queen who wasn't afraid to love, a ruler who had proven that the greatest betrayal wasn't falling for a guard, but underestimating the power of a queen who had found her king. The crown sat as firmly as ever on her head, but now everyone knew her heart had a guardian of its own.